Well, hey there, Gracious Gang. I'm Mike Creevy from thegraciousguest.org, back here for another great episode of The Gracious Guest Show, coming right up. But before we get to this interview, I want to ask you if you could be so kind and haven't done so already, please subscribe. We just hit 1,000 subscribers not too long ago. So it's pretty awesome, and it's just climbing. I can't believe how this has gone over this last couple of years. So thank you so much for all your support. Please share this with somebody new, maybe someone who hasn't seen any of this content before, especially if they're a Tolkien fan. So if you're listening to the podcast, also make sure you like, subscribe, follow, whatever the platform you're using asks you to do. And we could really use a good rating and review as well. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Pocket Casts, which is the one that I like to use a lot as far as an app. It's a really good one. I don't get paid to say that, so at least not yet. Anywho, we're going to dive right in here to this interview with my friend Thomas Salerno, and it's always a real pleasure. We talked about lots of different things before, and it's always sort of unexpected whatever our next topic's going to be. And as we just got off the call a few minutes ago, we already have some fun ideas for our next conversation. But Thomas got in touch with me a while back, or we were kind of talking. We do quite a bit, and somehow this Tolkien idea came up, this idea of just exploring J.R.R. Tolkien in general, and themes especially of beauty and hope. Thomas does a lot of work with J.R.R. Tolkien, and who is especially important to him as far as an influence, a real idol in a good way, for him, maybe an example to follow is maybe a better way to put it. His literary hero in many ways. So Thomas has been on the program before. I mentioned he's got a great website you can check out below. He's also doing some podcasting now, which is exciting. And he has a book. I have it posted. The link he sent me is right here. It's called Tolkien and Faith, Essays on Christian Truth in Middle-earth that he contributed to. It was a book with a bunch of articles on different themes of Christian faith in the writings of Tolkien, so you'll definitely want to check that out. I know I'm going to for sure, so look at all those links below at the end of this, or maybe bookmark those. But for now, let's jump right into my interview with Thomas Salerno on all things J.R.R. Tolkien. Check it out. All right, we are good to go. Thomas Salerno, thanks for coming back on the Gracious Guest Show.
Thanks, Mike, for having me back on. It's always a pleasure.
Well, and I was just going down the list. It's so Ray Bradbury, dinosaurs, and now Tolkien. So I'm already excited for whatever the next one will be.
I know, right? And thanks again for just having me on. I love these conversations.
Yeah. Well, and so I thought I'd just start off asking you if you just want to kind of catch us up with what you have going on. You sent me some links I'm going to put in the show notes, or, well, by the time people are watching or listening to this, they're already there. So what's new with you these days?
Well, I've been podcasting a lot. I've been podcasting with our friends at the StarQuest Network, SQPN. We've been doing The Secrets of Middle-earth, which is kind of apropos to our topic today. Mm-hmm. We've just wrapped up all our discussions of the Rings of Power, and we have a lot of cool topics coming this year. So it's going to be really awesome. I've also just launched my own podcast about sci-fi and fantasy from a Catholic perspective, Thomas Salerno's Perilous Realms, which is inspired by J.R.R. Tolkien. The Perilous Realm was one of the phrases he liked to use for the kind of fantastical fairy tale spirit of fiction. And so I'm going to be exploring fantasy and sci-fi from a Catholic perspective, like I've done over the last few years in my writing. It's just that I'm getting more into podcasting now, and that's that's really the format I've found that I'm the most comfortable with. And so I'm going to be doing a lot of podcasting going forward. It's been a lot of fun, and I have to thank you, Mike, for helping to inspire this, both your show here and introducing me to Dom Bettinelli at the StarQuest Network. It's just been a huge inspiration for me to, go all in on podcasting, and I love it.
Well, and it's so funny because and it's just the way this sort of networking goes. It's just, you meet someone, you talk to someone else, they hook you, but it's a beautiful family out there of again, from this not just Catholic, but certainly our Catholic media friends, to be able to have these conversations, and hopefully, for anyone watching this or listening to this today, for example, you never know. I mean, we have people tuning in around the world. We've got I've had people send me some comments from like Australia. I've had people in France. It's just crazy. Like I
Yeah,
never
I have a
tire
fan
of the
from
amazingness of this.
Slovakia who listens to
Yeah,
my show, and it's just
yeah.
wonderful.
We had some South African folks. Like it's just funny, you see the metrics and everything and the analytics and where people are tuning in. So welcome to all of you international folks here for sure. And by the way, we should of course maybe give a special shout out to anyone in the UK who's watching this, because we do have a very I've been blessed with the shroud work that I'm doing more and more of. There's a big UK contingent that I have somehow become good friends with. I
Oh, that's
never
awesome.
sought it out. It just happened, and the grace of God, they've welcomed me into their fold. So hey, everybody across the pond. So hope we do justice to J.R.R. Tolkien today. I know Thomas will. I'm just here for the discussion. So, well, and let's just dive into this too, because so we were talking about different things to discuss. I kind of hinted at that earlier. There's always fun things going on in our minds, but of course this is a topic, this man, this legend, this, I don't know what word to use to describe him, but why don't you tell us a little bit about yeah, well, and actually before I ask you to tell us about your background, I just I'm sure a lot of people watching this probably have a lot more cool stuff than I do, but I'm working on his letters right now, which is of course a lot of fun just to go through at night. This I did a reaction video or an unboxing, because the kids love those. This was a particularly cool version of. Did you see this with the script on the side and stuff, which is pretty
right?
sweet. So, but
That's
this one I really
gorgeous.
like is just a hefty kind of, and then these ones aren't, amazing to write home about, but these are the ones I took with me to Italy. So I got like the little Harcourt, or no, it's not Hart. What is it? It's oh, what was the publisher? Was it Houghton Mifflin? I can't remember.
I think it's Houghton
Yeah,
Mifflin. Yeah.
yeah. So and they're the print's really tiny in these, but this was great. Like my wife and I were on our honeymoon, and I was reading the Fellowship, and I'm like on the train in Italy, just like But it's great. They hold up pretty well. They look cool back on the shelf there behind me usually.
Oh
So
yeah.
yeah. So I've got a couple here. So
I'm a shameless collector of like different editions
yeah,
of the Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion and the Hobbit. I have a bunch of them,
cool.
and I have no intention of stopping anytime soon.
Do you like the one like the one the Silmarillion I have is the one that comes up when you get it on Amazon that has all the Ted Naismith is that Naismith or Nasmith? How does he say it? I don't know.
Oh,
Has all the
I'm not sure how
artwork
to
in it.
pronounce it, but no, it's not that edition. I
Okay.
have a very nice hardcover edition. It's purple.
Okay.
It's kind of a purple blue color, and it shows the elves as they first awake.
Oh, that's cool.
Very
That's cool.
cool. Yeah.
And then I don't know, again, like I said, I'm sort of a noob in some ways, this last few years. And I'm interrupting my question for you, so I'll get to that later. But just to ask you, like, how did you first come across Tolkien's writings? What was the experience like for you? How'd you get hooked?
Yeah, that's actually a really fun question because I hadn't read much fantasy before. I had read, when I was a kid, I had read the Chronicles of Narnia once, maybe twice, and then hadn't touched fantasy again until the 6th grade when they had us read the first Harry Potter book, The Sorcerer's Stone.
Mm-hmm.
And unlike a lot of kids in my generation, I was not impressed with Harry Potter.
I didn't do it for you.
I didn't have a problem with it. It's just that it didn't do much for me.
Sure.
And so after 6th grade, for junior high, my parents actually homeschooled me. And
okay.
so, and that was around 2000, 2001. So the same time the Peter Jackson movies are coming out. So the Lord of the Rings is kind of in the air. And so one day my mom comes up to me and she has a magazine. And this frustrates me because for the life of me, I cannot remember the name of this magazine. It might have been our local diocesan publication, but in any case, it had an article in it about J.R.R. Tolkien and the Lord of the Rings because J.R.R. Tolkien was a devout Catholic, and his books were now being made into Hollywood productions, so they wanted to to communicate to, a Catholic audience that, hey, this guy is kind of he's part of our patrimony,
Right. He's one of us.
He's one of us. So in any case, the article came with an illustration of Gandalf, and like gray robes, flowing beard, pointy hat, staff. And I had just come off, you got to remember, being disappointed by Harry Potter. I took one look at that image and I kind of gave my mom some sass. I rolled my eyes and went, ugh, wizards again.
Dumbledore, like, okay.
Yeah. And she's like, now, Thomas, this is different. This is not Harry Potter. Why don't you read the article first and then tell me whether this is something you'd be interested in or not?
Yeah.
So I did. And I was actually really intrigued. It talked about a lot of the biblical and, Christological symbolism inside that's kind of baked in to Tolkien's universe. Of course, unlike his friend C.S. Lewis, he wasn't really a huge fan of allegory, but it's there, like not in your face allegory like Aslan or something like that. But there's this undercurrent. It's really baked into his whole world. This sort of biblical and Christian worldview. And if
is it true, by the way, that
there?
Oh, and I'm sorry, I just because when you mentioned Gandalf, and just before I forget, I had heard, I was just talking to my students about this the other day, but I couldn't remember the source for it, and I didn't want to misspeak. But I think I heard that it was a deliberate intention of Tolkien's, or at least on some level, to base in large part Gandalf's character off Samuel in the Old Testament. Is that legit?
That's actually I heard one I have not heard before, but I wouldn't be surprised.
I gotta track that down. If someone can put that in the comments, if they know, because the idea of like you have this prophet figure, certainly Gandalf definitely is that, and then but he's also a warrior, which Samuel starts off as the last of the judges, so. Yeah, that's I want to look that up more, but it was neat because the picture I had up on the slide for my students, I was like, you can even just put like a gnarly, like pointy hat on him and a staff, and it even looks like he had a big gray beard in the picture. It was kind of like, they're like, oh yeah, I can see it, So that I just wanted to, but those things are, they've shaped his worldview, correct? And
definitely,
that's going to be in his yeah.
And and it has such a broad appeal to even non-Christians. When I was in college, a lot of my agnostic, atheist, even neo-pagan friends loved Lord of the Rings.
Right.
And they all, and when I would explain to them, hey, look, it has all of this imagery in it, they'd be like, really? What? I never realized that, because it's there if you're paying attention.
Right, but it's not there in a way that's going to drive you away if you're not already, sold on the Lord and on the church and all that,
Right, because and he very consciously, Tolkien, did not include anything cultic in terms of there's no churches in Middle-earth.
Right.
There's very little religious observance of any kind, no official hierarchy or structure. It's all very almost kind of like a primitive religion, right? There's no structure. They have veneration for these figures that they call the Valar, who are kind of angelic figures. And there's this idea that there's a god over all out there. But there's no analogous institution to the church. And that's a very important point, because Middle-earth, Tolkien conceived of it as our Earth. Just tens of thousands of years into the distant past. So this is
it's antediluvian
world, precisely,
and I think
it's antediluvian,
because you see that with the like in Genesis, and I mean those are the first few chapters. It's like Noah, or even before him, Seth, Seth and then his descendant Noah. Like you have that, like the father of the family having this. It's not so much like an outsourced priest caste, right? You have it. It's like the father is this priest, prophet, and king of the home, and that, and so you see those elements. Yeah, it just makes sense to when you see it. It's like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense that God would have made us like that, originally.
And I'm glad you brought up the priest, prophet, and king thing, because those images are all over Tolkien's wider universe, which us aficionados like to call the Legendarium.
Right.
So
what are your favorite examples of that, of those offices?
Well, there's three that I can think of right off the bat, which are the big ones that everyone comes to right away. You have the king figure is obviously Aragorn. He
Mhm.
is, the king in exile, the returning king. He's a Davidic figure. He's like a Christ figure. I mean, you have
Mm.
Return of the King, and
Right.
in a very
Right.
Christ-like way, he even does kind of the harrowing of hell. He descends into the underworld,
Right.
very much like the monomyth, and he, breaks the spirits loose from the underworld and absolves them of their
Doesn't he
sins.
even do the? I think I haven't read Return of the King in a while. Doesn't because it's not in the movie, but doesn't he even go around healing or
He
something like in the
does.
field hospital or
Yes.
something in Gondor?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's like right,
He has
like,
kind of almost preternatural healing powers,
yeah,
which is
right,
not really, yeah, and the movies don't emphasize that a whole lot.
right,
So you have Aragorn, but he's not a complete Christ figure. He's almost
sure,
like Christ's kingly aspect. Then, as you
right,
mentioned
right.
earlier, you have Gandalf as prophet.
Hmm.
He not only does he look like a prophet, but he acts like a prophet. He goes around and inspires the free peoples to resist against Sauron. He tells people when they're wrong, like he goes
Right,
to Theoden, king of Rohan, and says, "You're not doing enough." Like
right,
he says it to Denethor. Why are
right.
you in this defeatist attitude? He has a prophetic witness in a
They were. I,
way.
I love the description of the prophets of the Old Testament as the conscience of Israel,
Uh-huh.
which is pretty cool too. Like that. So yeah, that like the compass,
Yeah,
Yeah,
and Gandalf is in many ways the conscience of Middle Earth.
right,
Like when he makes sure that everyone is kind of in this fight against Sauron, and when other people lose hope, he doesn't.
mm,
And part of this is because, and you don't learn this until much later until pretty much the very end of the book, is that Gandalf has a ring of power.
right,
And his ring of power, part of its abilities is to inflame the hearts of people to work towards the good.
right.
That's what his ring does. And you can see it when he goes around, inspires people. And he
Yeah,
has a very, he has obviously, if you've seen the movies, this, a death and resurrection experience.
right,
Fighting a demonic spirit in the underworld, who
right. As
descends to the
the
very bottom
servant
of
of the
Middle Earth.
secret fire, isn't that the
Yeah,
that's the
yes. And the secret
Stratford
fire,
Caldecott? Yeah,
right.
yeah.
He's just and the secret fire is Tolkien's term for kind of the creative principle of
Mm,
God. So Gandalf is saying, "I am the
right,
servant of the secret fire. I am the Lord's servant," which is what a prophet is too, the Lord's
right,
servant. And he was sent on mission. He was sent to Middle Earth to defy
right.
Sauron, to bring the free peoples into union against the enemy. And then you
Would that
have
be like
kind of
the Holy Spirit maybe in a particular way with like the Isaiah, right? Like when Jesus
oh
quotes that Isaiah
yeah.
prophecy about the Spirit of the Lord is upon me to preach liberty to the captives. I wonder
Captives,
if
yeah.
it's that the closest, like you said, he's not directly going for analogy, but I wonder if that's kind
Mhm.
of motivating that secret fire imagery, which of
Oh
Pentecost,
yeah.
right? The fire of the Holy
Ex-
Spirit, Yeah.
hmm And remember, like I forget which biblical reference this is, but it talks about the Holy Spirit being there at the creation,
Mm, mm-hmm.
and I have what is it? I send forth my spirit, and they are created.
Yes.
And the
Yeah.
secret
Yep.
fire is the creative principle of God in
Beautiful.
Middle Earth. And then you
Wow.
have the priestly figure in Frodo. Now, that may seem odd at first. You're like, how is Frodo a
Right.
priest? He sacrifices everything.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
everything. He goes to the very limit. There's this phrase that Bishop Robert Barron likes to use where he says that Christ went to the very limit, to the uttermost depths of God forsakenness.
Mm.
And that's kind of like what Frodo does. He goes to the pit of Mordor, to essentially the
Right.
center of hell, to the limit
Right.
of God forsakenness, where he can no
Right.
longer feel the grace of the Valar or the God of Middle Earth. everything is darkness, everything is
Right.
evil around him, and he sacrifices everything, even the clothes off his back. He essentially has nothing when he gets to Mount Doom. And
Right.
he can't even and the funny thing is, he's not a perfect priest figure because he's unable to cast the ring into the fire at the very end.
Right.
So he's not a
Right.
perfect Messiah in a way, and none of Tolkien's Messiah figures are. He purposefully
Right.
didn't want to make them, analogies. So he has them. They all have flaws. But Frodo, even though he sort of fails at the end, and there's that famous U catastrophe where, of course, Gollum ends up unintentionally destroying the ring, and it's expressed as fate, that was meant to happen. And that how earlier in the story, when Frodo chooses to spare Gollum, if he had never done that, the quest would have completely failed. So there's this idea of providence at work in Middle-earth. Even though the god figure, who is named Eru Iluvatar, even though he doesn't act in ways that are huge and noticeable, kind of like, God on Mount Sinai or something like that, he has this sort of providential care throughout the Lord of the Rings that if you're looking for it, you'll start to notice it in key moments in the story. And just, again, all these things are baked into the Lord of the Rings. I love it.
Yeah.
Once you notice it, you'll reread the Lord of the Rings in a whole different light. And it's
what's so
fantastic.
What's so funny and so just kind of expected with our conversations, and the people listening and watching will just have to believe me when I say this. None of this was what we scripted that we were going to talk about to kick things off in the first place.
Nope.
Because which is great, because we're heading there next, which is even more awesome. But just to kind of open it this way, I do have to mention, I forgot to mention this earlier, back to for our British friends, I am drinking tea. This isn't just a prop here with these tea, this brand, they have these little like sayings. It's almost like a fortune cookie. It says, relate to your greatness and not to your weakness. And I was like, well, I know what they're going for there, but that could be taken some wrong ways there, which reminds me of what you were just saying. Like, it's not Frodo's greatness that saves the day. It's his weakness.
And here's
so I found that tremendously ironic.
Right. It's because, and Lord of the Rings now is kind of like the prototypical fantasy novel, so that people, like, a lot of tropes come from it.
Right.
But really, Lord of the Rings is actually a very subversive fantasy novel. Not a lot of other fantasy novels are like it, because in any other fantasy novel of the time, let's say a contemporary of Tolkien's, Robert Howard, creator of the Conan mythos. So in any other fantasy work of the mid-20th century, somebody like Aragorn would have been the hero. Big, strong warrior who beats the enemy into submission.
Right.
That's not who saves Middle-earth. Aragorn has an important part to play. But it's Frodo, this nobody, this quote-unquote weak, insignificant hobbit from the Shire, who's the only one who can save Middle-earth.
I think Dr. Peter Kraft, and he didn't make this up by any means, but a lot of my exposure to Tolkien and my deepening of, like you had said earlier, I had more experience with C.S. Lewis, and he certainly wrote. I don't know by the words who wrote more, but I mean Lewis definitely with his apologetic works, that was something that Tolkien, to my knowledge, I don't know that he ever wrote any published sort of apologetic works. That wasn't really his bailiwick, but but I got a lot of a deepening appreciation for both of them through Peter Kraft, just his talks and that sort of thing, and reading his books. And I thought, just really simply put it, that what's so beautiful about it is the Hobbit's work, Frodo's work in particular. It was really the only thing that could destroy the ring, specifically because it was the only thing Sauron couldn't see coming. Because at the end of the day, he can't, his sin has blinded. It's just like the devil, right? His sin has blinded him so much. He can ape power. Like, he can try to mimic and sort of piggyback off things like God's glory and God's power and majesty and that kind of thing, and do it in a diabolical way. But the one thing he can't fake is humility. Like
No,
it's his
yeah.
core. Like he is pride all the way down. So
Hmm.
the idea that anyone could ever actually make this sacrificial offering is something he literally just can't understand. And I think
Yeah.
that that's so beautiful at the core of the gospel too. Like the devil, he's all over it. He's trying to get in. He's trying to figure it out, tempting the Lord in the desert. He can't figure out what it's really about because he can't actually believe that he's actually going to do that, for real.
Oh,
It's
precisely.
it's
Yeah.
beautiful, beautiful.
And what's amazing is that he's blinded by his pride and his sin, yet his symbol is a giant eye,
Yeah,
the all-seeing eye, yet he's blind.
yeah,
He's
right,
completely blinded himself to anything that doesn't proceed from him.
right,
He's like, I wouldn't do this,
right,
therefore nobody would.
right. Because I'm the biggest, smartest,
Like,
baddest. And you're like, you don't get it.
he can't think outside his own perspective, from his own
Yeah.
worldview. And what was great about, I don't want to get into the whole debate of whether this show was good for Tolkien or not, but one of the things I really like about the Rings of Power is that they
Hmm.
show that Sauron is a really interesting character because he thinks he's doing a good thing for Middle Earth. He thinks if everyone would just listen to me and do things my way, everything would be
Hmm.
so much better. All of this is your fault for not going along with my ideas, by not doing it my way.
Right.
And like there's
Yeah.
this idea in contemporary fantasy that the Dark Lords are not interesting characters. And I
Hmm.
protest against that. They can be interesting characters
Yeah.
because no Dark Lord ever thinks of himself in those terms.
Right.
They never
Yeah.
think of themselves as Dark Lords. They think of themselves as, oh well, of course I'm doing everybody else a favor, you know?
Honestly, it's. I think it's why I really, people can agree to disagree, but I think a lot of people agree on this point for what it's worth. But I really thought Thanos was such an intriguing character in the MCU
Mm-hmm.
films, where it's like, even in like the after Infinity Saga TV shows and movies, like you'll see someone, I think in Hawkeye, he has the mug. He's over at the girl's aunt's house, whatever, the mug that just says Thanos was right,
Oh,
and he's just like sipping out of it because it's a mug that's there, and it's just
right.
it's so. But well, let me ask you this here, Thomas. We'll just segue a
Mm-hmm.
little bit, but because I think there's a really good sort of uh, off ramp, so to speak, into this little side territory of these different themes that you had mentioned that were on your mind, and the first one was this sort of balance here, right, between this belonging, or this theme of belonging or acceptance,
Right.
versus this theme of restlessness and of or loss as well. I think you had down there. Is that right?
Oh
What were
yeah.
you kind of thinking with what jumps out at you here and across? And are we talking basically Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, or all of Tolkien's work? I don't know how you wanted to
I think
sort of
all in,
focus on that theme.
this is a huge theme in all of Tolkien's work, but you can see it in Lord of the Rings. There are
Hmm.
definitely allusions to it, especially the elves. The elves
Mm,
love Middle Earth, but
yeah,
they're not satisfied by it. They have
right.
this longing in them for something greater, for a place where they truly belong. Because even though they love Middle Earth, they don't belong there.
They're not from there. Or, well, I mean, not all. Yeah, it's
They
like
originated there, but it's not their
right.
destination.
That's right, right, right,
As immortals, they don't belong in the mortal lands where things and people die and pass away.
right,
They belong in Valinor, the undying lands with the angelic Valar.
right.
That's where they belong, and that's where they're constantly being called to. In the Return of the King, the book, Legolas mentions how, when he first catches sight of the sea and he hears the wailing of the gulls, he says that's the sea longing is a very dangerous thing to stir in an elf,
Huh.
because then they'll never feel at home in Middle Earth again. They'll just start thinking about the sea and making that voyage to Valinor,
Hmm.
and it's like what I believe it's Saint Augustine says, we're not made for this world.
Right.
You know, we are made for somewhere else. And the in the elves, it's actually almost, Valinor is essentially an earthly paradise. They don't
Right.
have the same, you know, afterlife as human beings do because they're functionally immortal. But even
Right.
they have a place where they're going, a place where they belong, and they know it's not in Middle Earth. And there's that tension there because they still love everything in Middle Earth, and they love the works of their hands. They love the things that they've made.
Right.
And that's how Sauron tempts them, by the way, to create the rings. He says, you know, if you create these rings, you'll be able to preserve everything in Middle Earth that you love, and you'll be able to hold on to it forever.
Right. Is that, I'm trying to remember. I have my this comes in handy sometimes, the David Day's Encyclopedia of Tolkien.
Oh yeah,
is
that was
kind of
one
a
of the
kind
first
of a fun
books
one.
Tolkien books I ever
Was
got
that
was that
my
one.
wife
Yeah.
got it for me for Christmas. I'm trying to remember though. I don't see it in here. I'm trying to remember the name. It might be in the Silmarillion. The name of the basically the I think it's kind of like the heaven analog. Darn it. Is it it starts with an M, I thought, and I can't think of it. Not oh, well, whatever. Someone
Is
because
it a
it's
place
not
in
Valinor.
Valinor?
I
Because
don't think so. I think it's where it's
where God is the timeless halls.
yeah, but I'm trying to think with the whole. It's been a long time since I read the Silmarillion too, but the is it
Right.
with the Baron and Luthien story? I can't remember where one of them goes when they basically die,
Oh,
and it's
the halls of Mandos.
Mandos.
It's
That's it,
it's
Mandos.
less
Yeah.
like heaven, it's more like limbo.
Okay, almost, or I don't know.
Yeah.
See, I don't know enough about Valhalla because what's so cool is you have Tolkien that is this incredible philologist, who just,
Mhm.
and that's to me the beauty of because we've titled this hope and beauty and or beauty and hope, and we're going to get to these themes, but we're already talking about them, I think, already, of course, but I just the language, just
Yeah.
I'm not a linguist per se. I certainly not compared to no one's compared to him, but
No, yeah.
to see like he tells that story I think in his letters about finding a book of like Finnish grammar, and
Mhm.
like and being like intoxicated by Finnish grammar, and I'm just like who does that like that, but he I my suspicion is that the same spiritual I don't know how to describe it. I mean, it's. I think he had this ability, almost like seeing the Matrix. Like the original Matrix movie when Cypher says he doesn't even see the code anymore.
Right.
He's just. I just feel like Tolkien had this innate, God given, I really believe, ability to see the fact that all of creation is spoken. That
Oh,
that
yes.
language is not just labels human beings come up with to make oh, we'll call that an orange, like no, it's there's something more mysterious going on, that we're actually tapping into something objective, so I don't know if there was
Mhm.
anything as a writer, if there's just anything in
Oh,
particular about his
yeah.
command of
Of language,
language,
and just, and I've in recent years
veneration of language. Trying to
yeah,
think of, yeah.
in recent years I've become more captivated by his poetry that's in
Oh
the
yeah.
Lord of the Rings, and
Yeah.
it's just beautiful. And the fact, like you said, Middle Earth is sung into
Yeah.
existence. One of my
Right.
favorite parts of the Silmarillion is the very beginning, the
Yeah.
creation myth
Right.
of the creation of the universe through song and speech,
Yeah.
and it's just so beautiful. And I'm like, this is the truth. I'm
I
just
know.
like,
So
there's something true about
yeah.
this, like
Yeah.
I can't explain it entirely, but
I know it's not canonical scripture, but
right,
I firmly believe that if you basically take that, what's it, the Ainul, how do you pronounce it,
the Ainulindale.
the Ainul, and you like basically put that with Lewis's description of Aslan singing, and the
Singing, I was
same
going to
kind of
mention
thing,
that.
right?
Yeah.
And the great dance at the end of Paralandra. Like if you average those
Mhm.
three, I feel like just from what I've read, at least, that's just feels the closest to the, the reality.
They were tapping
Um,
into something,
yeah,
and I'm not sure
yeah,
what, but it's And that's the thing, and that's one of the other beautiful things I love about Middle Earth is that, and his fantasy, it is a response to modern materialism.
Hmm.
Because he's writing this in the middle of the 20th century. He's writing his first Middle Earth stories while he's in the trenches in World War I.
Right. Right.
In the apotheosis of mechanized industrial death.
Yep.
Where
it's the scenes like in the movie. I love those scenes in the Two Towers that really give you that feel for just what did it say? Saruman's mind is wheels
metal
and
and wheels.
metal and wheels.
Yeah.
Just
and just
tearing everything down.
Over the course of that 30-year period in the 20th century between the two world wars, the entire edifice of the Industrial Revolution just collapses in on itself in an orgy of death, showing that once you strip, and I've heard people recently call it the numinous, kind of like the supernatural.
Yes.
Once you strip that away from people's worldviews, all you've got left is just this hopeless materialism that can only end in just people and things being used as means to an end, which is exactly what Sauron and Saruman do.
And I'm not, intentionally I'm not intentionally pandering to our British friends, but here I go. There's something I haven't seen much of the UK, but we visited back when I was 20, I think it was. My long story short, my uncle had tried out for the British Open back in the late 70s and came within like a stroke or two of making it, and it was in Scotland. It was up in I think it was I think it was at St Andrews that year, but because it rotates, it's Carnoustie or Troon or these different golf courses, and my dad and him, they're in their late 20s at the time, late to mid 20s, and the only way they could pull that off or whatever was to basically, they got one-way tickets to Scotland and worked there. They worked in a bar on the North Sea, like in Anstruther or near Anstruther and Fife and everything in Scotland. It's just like this, hilarious story. But they made all these friends, and the stories they tell of their experience in like rural fishing town Scotland sound a lot to me like the experiences he shares and the stories you hear about the Inklings and the beauty of the natural beauty of the British Isles. Of course, he's in England. I mostly was in Scotland, but I was thinking of that with just two last things I want to say with that is when I was in the Highlands, the only other place I've ever been on this planet, and I've been to a lot of them, I've been very blessed to travel a lot. The only other place I felt anything remotely like what I felt just in the Highlands, just seeing that and being there, was when I was in Jerusalem. And I don't know what it is, but I am convinced there's something otherworldly about the British Isles, that
Tolkien
I'm sure.
That.
Well, and that's the thing is I can almost taste just in my tiny way, just from visiting, to be of that land or England more specifically, but to just see it being eaten before your very eye. I can't imagine that devastation that he would feel, and except to read the end of the destruction of the Shire or the Shire, the not destruction, but kind of, right? The pillaging of it, and there's did you ever watch Foyle's War? I'm rambling here, but I think you'll like this.
No, I've not.
British TV show, BBC TV show about a police investigator back home during World War II. And it's a very, very great show that was on for years of all the different things, going on, on the home front, when you're back home and the crimes people are committing, and it's a great show. And there's one episode where they have to put in an airfield, and there's this really somber scene where the guy who owned that farmland he loses the battle to prevent it being turned into an airfield, and it has to be turned into an airfield for people's safety. Like, and he gets that, but he shares this just completely heartbreaking, revelation where he just basically explains how long that's like it's been in his family, for like 800 years, or it's something crazy. and this beautiful, and he points out, and they have to put this stuff in there now for this war effort, but it's not going back to the way it was when the war is over. It's done. When the war's over, this is going to be a commercial airfield. That's where they're going to put the hotels. Like, he's pointing around, like,
Right.
we don't get that back. Like, we've made this decision for the immediate need for this mission, and that's what I see with Saruman, right? That just,
Oh yeah.
I have a mission and I'm going to do this, and it's just, I don't care the consequences. I don't care what this means to people. He's lost that sense of the beauty, that comes from somewhere else,
Oh, absolutely. And the elves kind of call this the long defeat. They know they can't stave off the time of humanity, of men. They know they can't stop it from happening. But that doesn't mean that they don't wish they could, that they wish they could arrest things the way they are forever, but they have their little places like Valinor and Rivendell,
right,
where things kind of stay the same, and time is kind of wonky in Lorien and Rivendell.
Yeah. Doesn't Sam say something about that, or Frodo? They say, like, it doesn't seem to pass here. It just is.
Yeah, it just is,
or something like that. Like, gosh.
And that's the power of the elven rings, and again, that was Sauron's kind of in. He knew the way he could get at the elves was to tempt them to want to keep things the way they were forever. And not sort of move on, to hold on instead of coming to terms with their restlessness and realizing that they have a home beyond this world. And this world is beautiful. It is good. God made everything, and he made it very good. Scripture is very clear on that. But this is also not, what is the phrase? We have no lasting city here.
Right.
And some of the elves want a lasting city here. Some of the men want a lasting city. When Sauron tempts the men of Numenor with immortality, they want to stay in Middle-earth forever. They want to be immortal like the elves, to have immortal life unchanging, without realizing that from the elf point of view, it's very interesting. The elves call death the gift of men. And from a human perspective, that sounds very cruel.
Yeah.
But remember, the elves are functionally immortal, and even when they're killed, say in battle, they don't leave this plane of existence. They go to the halls of Mandos, and then they're re-embodied. So they don't even really die. They don't go to heaven, in a sense. And so from an elf point of view, an elf is going to say to a human being, look, you get to leave. You get to go and be with Eru Ilúvatar for eternity. We don't get that. We have to live in what they call the circles of the world forever. You get to leave. You have a gift. And a lot of
it's even in the Ring, like the poem. I think it's basically 3 times in the one mention of man that mortality. Like 9 for mortal men doomed to die, like mortal doomed to die.
Right? Yeah.
It's like death is, the what's the who said, I always forget who actually said the quote, that the 2 things that are guaranteed, right, or death and taxes.
Right.
Well, but no, that's the, there's no avoiding that. That's the, I like how, correct me if I'm wrong, but in the Silmarillion, I think when man first shows up on the scene, whatever the version of Eden and the fall is in Tolkien's Legendarium has already happened, and there's that veiled reference to just human beings show up and they're a mess. Like it's already like
that has happened.
Eden's over there somewhere, right? Yeah.
We are told that Morgoth, who is he's Sauron's boss, he's kind of a Satan figure, that he has somehow been at work among the humans, and he somehow corrupted them. But we're never given any details.
Brilliant.
And again, because remember, we're left to imply, because it's supposed to be our world, And even in
Yeah.
our world, we don't know the details. We know
Right.
Genesis's poetic account of
Yeah.
it, but we
Yeah, there
don't
may
know
not
that.
have been any actual fruit involved. Like that's not the
Right.
point. It's the work was done.
Yeah,
you
and
know.
I think that knowledge has kind of been very providentially sequestered from us
Yeah.
until the eschaton, until the
Yeah.
final revelation, and we know all this stuff. Something about what happened back then is just not. God doesn't want that. I think he just doesn't want us to be curious about it. And in a
Yeah.
way, Tolkien's the same way. There's so many beautiful mysteries in Middle Earth, whether it's
Yeah.
the origin and fate of men, or whether it's Tom Bombadil.
Oh my
Who is
gosh.
he? What is
Yeah.
he? Why? Tolkien's
Yeah.
like, I'm giving
I've
you
heard.
no answers
Right.
whatsoever.
So I've heard so many, and all the speculation, of course, that's out there on him is really awesome, and it all sounds good. I'm like, I like that. And then I hear something else. I'm like, I like that
I
too.
like that.
One of the
I
most
have my
interesting
own
ones.
pet theory.
Oh,
I'm sure it's
do
wrong,
do you want to
but
share it or no?
well, I won't
Or
spoil it because we're going to
okay.
talk about it on the Secrets of Middle Earth in depth
Oh, okay.
in a
Okay.
future episode that's coming up soon.
Gotcha.
So, but I have my own theory, but I'm sure it's wrong, you know.
Well,
But it's like,
I'll tell you the one that I heard when we're off here, so people will be like, "Oh, come on, you can't do that to us." But that's so as not to spoil it for anyone else. But yeah, it's interesting, interesting stuff. Um, well,
and again, just
along
so
those
beautiful.
exactly, yeah, no, and that's I was going to ask you like along because we touched on this a little bit, but this other theme too of like longing and journey, and I
Mm-hmm.
just wanted to mention the word that it sounds a lot like I think the word Lewis um brings up quite a bit with this same sort of thing in mind is this German term Sehnsucht, this desire for something we don't quite know what, and where do I wanted to ask you about with the journey, sort of impulse, what characters in particular. I mean, obviously Bilbo, Frodo, but I don't know if there's any that you wanted to mention in particular where you see a very interesting sort of window into this inner yearning to go from A to B. Um,
Oh yeah, again, like I had mentioned earlier, definitely all the elves, they have this sort of journey
right,
impulse baked into them. But of course the hobbits, and it's funny because Frodo can never be fully healed unless he embarks on the journey to Valinor.
right,
He also has to let go of Middle Earth. There's actually this very beautiful line in one of the final scenes of Return of the King when, Sam is bereft of the fact that he's like, Frodo, I thought you were going to be able to enjoy the Shire for the rest of your life.
hmm,
And Frodo, he says to him, but the way of the world is that some people have to give things up and lose them so that others may keep them.
hmm,
And it's like I was saying, how Frodo
wow,
gives up everything, even his place in the Shire, even his ability to enjoy the fruits of his labor. He surrenders all of it,
yeah,
because he knows that he will never find healing for both his physical wounds and his psychological emotional scars
hmm,
in this world. There's this sense
right,
that he will only find final healing, and that those wounds will find their ultimate meaning in some other world. And so he
right,
travels to Valinor with the elves, and that final scene when he takes the
hmm,
ship, and when Gandalf says, you know, dear friends, here at the shores of the sea comes the end of our fellowship in Middle Earth. I got choked up a little bit there because
yeah,
I always get choked up and
I
at
do,
that moment,
yeah.
you
Well,
know.
I'm a sucker, and I know there's different, of course, different opinions about the movies and everything, but they were for me my first kind of foray into all things Tolkien as well, and I love them to this
Yeah.
day, and the Howard Shore, like I'm a big film score nut, so like the Howard
Oh,
Shore
same.
scores,
Yeah.
like my whole all through college and everything, like I would listen to this day. I have like an endless, now with Spotify and the way that works, like I have this just huge like soundscape thing of a bunch of them I listen to a lot, um, but that is what I'm thinking of, Thomas, is this is so beautiful because you said earlier about with Frodo's priestly function of going to the the uttermost of God-forsakenness, sorry, all the way to the
Right.
bottom, because that's how far you have to go to put the bad stuff to death, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
to
Yeah.
initiate the cure, so to speak, because that's where you have to go. And then he comes back up, which is certainly like a resurrection motif. But
Mm-hmm.
just like our Lord doesn't stay here and walk around on earth in that particular mode, you have
Right.
the ascension. So I
Right.
would almost see, again, like, not to put too much of an allegorical point on it, but it's so plain, this idea that you went and you did this terrible work that only you could do, and it worked, and it's here for everybody, but
Right.
you have now to go to the other far extreme to sort of stretch the other way. It's just really, there's a lot to ponder there.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that there's so much to ponder too about how, just in our lives that the things we hold on to the tightest are the things we aren't going to get to keep,
Mm.
you know. And that, the the malice of the ring is that it wants you to hold on to it.
Mm.
People can't just cast it away. There's a great line from Aragorn. He's not even talking about the ring, he's talking about something else. But he says to one of the hobbits, the person who can't let go of a treasure at need is in fetters.
Mm.
And that's so true. When we let these transient things chain us
Right.
to this world, and again, they're good things. The world is
Yeah.
good. People are good. Things are
Right.
good and useful to us, but they can't be our final end. They
Right. They're
can't
not
be the
ends in
thing
themselves.
themselves. They can't be the thing that we put the most stock in,
Right.
you know.
Right. I forget who it was that said, a man is a slave to anything he cannot part with that is less than himself. Something like that.
That's essentially what Aragorn said. Yeah,
That's,
like
and of course Gollum, just like holding this thing, like, just, jeez.
and he holds
We
on
did,
to it as he's falling to his death.
right.
He can't get
My
rid of it.
my wife and I, with Rings of Power, we had to laugh a little bit with the whole, like, when they're they're getting into the process of making something, you know. We were
Oh
just
yeah.
laughing. We're like, oh, come on. No, we were just laughing. It's just like, it has to be like a small crown is too big. Like, just, it's a ring. We know
Yeah, just say
it's
it.
gonna, they're
Just say it.
rings. The show is
They're
called Rings
rings
of, right, but
of
they
power.
definitely had some fun with that.
Oh, they,
Well,
they
this,
had fun stringing us along
oh,
with a lot of things. Yeah.
absolutely. What do you, is there, I mean, there's the obvious, I'm just trying to think here, like, just for fun, just not to
Mm-hmm.
put you to the test, but I'm sure I could. I'm sure you're up to it. With this other theme too, like these themes of, like, there's so many. You just picked a couple, of course, but like endurance, long suffering,
Oh
perseverance.
yeah.
Which, again, we've covered some of these. Is there anybody that maybe you think people wouldn't normally think of, at least right away, who might be a
Hmm.
fun example of at least some of that? Someone who
Oh,
endures a little.
specifically of endurance.
Yeah,
Yeah. Hmm. Somebody fun. Let's see.
yeah. Because I was thinking.
I
There's,
kind of think the other two hobbits, because of the
yeah,
movies, get
yeah,
kind of characterized as the comic relief. And
right.
there's definitely some of that in the books.
Hmm.
But I admire Merry and Pippin because they seem to change the most
I
of
think so
all the
too. Yeah,
hobbits. And they endure, they don't let these crazy things that are going on around them break them.
right,
Instead, they use it as a catalyst for personal growth. Merry and Pippin come back and save the Shire
right.
at the very end. They're the ones who lead
Yeah,
the hobbits in getting Saruman and all his minions out of the Shire and rescuing it. Like
in some ways they're the least likely, right?
right,
Or at least, because
they're
I mean, at least with
kids.
Frodo, like, he's,
Mm-hmm.
Frodo's like got this heritage with Bilbo of, like, the
Bilbo, and he's
adventurer,
also
and
50 years old. You
right,
have to
he's
remember
older.
he's
Yeah,
older. These are kids. They're in their
right.
20s,
Yeah,
and like and they come back and like they endure all this stuff. Merry becomes a rider of Rohan. Pippin
Yeah.
becomes a guard of the Citadel of Gondor. You know, it's like I just love how much they grow and change so much, and they never let anything that happens to them break their spirit. Like there's this great moment
Yeah.
when, okay, they get captured by the orcs at the beginning of the Two Towers, and they get dragged across Rohan. They're beaten. They're given horrible food. You know,
Mm.
they're put on a forced march across
Yeah.
hundreds of miles, and as soon as they escape from the orcs, like within a few minutes, they're cracking jokes with one another.
Right.
And they're, you know, they found joy and peace again just a few minutes after they've escaped. And there's a
Yeah.
line in the book where Tolkien's like, you would have never guessed that these two people had just experienced something horrible and traumatic. You know, they never let anything break their spirit, break their hope, which is that
Yeah.
final theme, you know, I wanted to touch on. Merry and
Yeah.
Pippin and all the hobbits really have this, and other characters comment on it, that hobbits are resilient. There's something about
Yeah.
hobbits. There's something in their makeup, in their fiber, that they are just able to continue on hoping that even if they die, even if things seem to come to a bitter end, that it's all for
Yeah.
some kind of greater purpose.
Yeah.
You know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I was thinking of it's kind of cheating in a way. I was thinking though of Treebeard, you know, and the Ents, just because of their because of their
Oh,
structure,
brilliant.
however you want to. But I was just laughing. I was double checking here because I forgot where I read it, but I think it's in it. Humphrey Carpenter, you know, Tolkien's biographer, who edited the letters. I think I might have read it in here somewhere, maybe in the forward or something. But I'd seen somewhere along the line. I knew that Lewis had based Elwyn Ransom in the Ransom trilogy, which is one of my favorite series, you know, by C.S. Lewis long before the Narnia books. His sort of space, I don't know, theodicy, what you'd call it. It's interesting.
Oh, it's
But
brilliant.
you know,
Yeah.
he had based the Ransom character in many ways off of Tolkien, you know, as a
Yes.
philologist character, everything. But I read that Tolkien, in return, sort of based Treebeard, at least elements of Treebeard, off C.S. Lewis.
Now
They,
that's interesting.
it said, and this was something online. It was just that Treebeard's deep, booming voice with his hrum hrum mannerism is said by Tolkien's biographer Humphrey Carpenter to be based on that of C.S. Lewis.
Wow.
So that's you know, I don't know.
Interesting factoid that I only learned recently, that one of the last things Tolkien and Lewis spoke about before Lewis's death was trees.
Oh, not surprising.
So that's brilliant. That's brilliant.
Although, see, Treebeard, I'm sure, had much better fire discipline, though, because I also just recently, I was reading Weight of Glory, and, you know, Lewis's, what's it called? I guess a
Memoir,
sermon,
kind
you know,
of?
that he gave,
Yeah.
you know, well,
Oh, his
yeah,
sermon, right.
and it was, I can't think of his secretary's name was, Lewis's secretary. Goodness gracious. Walter Hooper. Yeah, I remembered it before I typed it. Yay, for what it's worth. But I guess Walter Hooper said that Lewis, like, there was because he was only with him for a few months, you know, as his private secretary, I guess, at the end of his life, and he said that there were his jacket, like his tweed jacket, was like patched over and over again because he'd get bored with his pipe, like his lit pipe, and just drop it in his pocket, and it would like burn through the tweed. And he said, like, the nurses, like, people were so mad at him at the end of his life, like they couldn't believe he hadn't like died in a house fire because of sticking his pipe in his pocket.
Right.
But I'm just laughing because, of course, you've got Tolkien on the cover here with his pipe. He's, you know, but how many of us would love to be a fly on the wall at those, you know, just in the
Inkling,
you know, like the next booth
Yeah.
over at the Inklings, and just like leaning over, you know. But that, you know, you have, of course, these themes of fellowship, of having that in their own way. Like, I don't, you know, these guys weren't globetrotters, but no, necessarily. But I feel like even in their lives, you have this. There's a homebodiness, right? Like there's a sort of like they're very, you know, kind of, they got their routines. You know, they love their routines, but in their writing, I feel like, in their conversations, in this elevated exploration of the true, the good, and the beautiful, right? It's like there's a
Absolutely.
journeying there. There's
Oh yeah, and
this
that you're
kindred
never alone
spirits.
on these
Right,
journeys. There's
right.
always that fellowship element,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah,
And even when you think you're alone, you're not, because
right.
as Catholics, as Christians, we believe that we have the communion of saints, your
Yeah,
guardian angel. We're never alone, even when we are seemingly alone, like without other humans around us.
yeah,
We're never alone on this journey to our final end, to our
right.
Valinor, kind of, essentially.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say, well, that's actually kind of a, maybe we can we only have a few minutes left here, but for now, but beautiful segue, because you had that note about light and hope amidst darkness, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
beauty, but what about hope? Maybe, and you just sort of, I think, teed it up nicely there
Right. And that
with that
there's,
line from, is it, I guess, Galadriel, right? When she gives the light to Frodo, right? That's
yeah,
this light when all others fail or
when
all
all
others
other
go out.
lights go out.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Because, there's that hope that we hold on to, and especially as Christians,
Yeah.
we mentioned that, we know Christ has gone to the uttermost end of God forsakenness and come back. We know that death doesn't have the final word ever,
Mm.
even when it appears
Yeah.
to. And when, the Lord of the Rings has gotten me through some tough times.
Sure.
Some tough times. And that
Yeah.
element of hope has been a huge part of it, knowing that no matter what happens, no matter what challenges you face, even when it seems like you've failed, there's
Mm-hmm.
always a resurrection that's coming.
Yeah.
God never gives up on you, ever.
Right.
So don't you give up on yourself. And that's a message that I've taken to heart, in part because of the work of J.R.R. Tolkien. And that's why he's my favorite literary figure. He's my literary hero. I know I can never be like him ever, but that's not going to stop me from putting words on the page and hoping
No.
they make some kind of sense.
Well, and we're not in a church authoritative position to weigh his canonization or anything like that, but I'm pretty confident he's in the heavenly realm, so there's a good patron for you, maybe. For
Yeah,
sure. So
absolutely.
I'm sure he'd be happy to keep you in his prayers, no doubt. So, oh my gosh, Thomas, I don't want to. I couldn't believe it when I looked at I just peeked over at the clock for like the first time. I'm like, no way. So
Yeah.
I think we'll put a bow on it here, but of course
Hmm.
it's always to be continued for sure. So
Absolutely.
thank you so much for coming back on The Gracious Guest yet again.
And thank you so much,
Yeah.
Mike. As always, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I can't wait for our next bull session.
Oh man, same. Hey, God bless you. We'll see you.
God bless you. Thank you.
After we got off the interview portion of it, we talked for like another 20 minutes about all kinds of interesting stuff that is going to surely shape our future conversations. I'm utterly convinced. So just to kind of end here this particular episode for you, I think maybe to give Viggo Mortensen, who played Aragorn in the Peter Jackson films, the last word when asked why these stories are so impactful, so important, so profoundly meaningful for so many people, and continue to be all the more so as time goes on. He simply said, it's because they're true stories. True stories, right? Not, factually details about hobbits and Shire and all the particulars. All of these elements, these themes, these true observations about the way the world really is, that we can see in Tolkien's writings are incredibly enriching, incredibly insightful, and tremendously beneficial for all of us, regardless of what your background is. So, thank you so much for tuning into the Gracious Guest show today. Go read some Tolkien. What are you doing around here? All right, take care, and don't forget to wonder. God bless.